Have you ever heard someone say that archaeology has proven an ancient text to be true? Or maybe you've heard the exact opposite, that it's proven them to be fiction. This whole debate can get pretty heated, and it often feels like you have to pick a side. So let's break this down. You really do see these two extreme camps. You've got view A, which says, yep, the digs prove it, every single word is literally true. And then you've got view B, which says, nope, the science shows it's all inaccurate, just a bunch of stories. It's presented as this simple all-or-nothing choice.
But here's the thing, what if both of those views are kinda wrong? What if they're asking archaeology to do something it was never designed to do? Well, in this explainer, we're gonna move past that black and white debate and give you a much better framework for understanding what archaeology can tell us, and just as importantly, what it can't.
Okay, let's dive into our first big principle. And it's a tough one to swallow. The hard truth is that almost the entire ancient world is just gone. We're working with the tiniest, most scattered pieces of a giant puzzle.
Think about it. Before we even look at a single piece of pottery, we have to get our heads around everything that's been lost forever. Wood rots, paper turns to dust, buildings get torn down and their stones get reused, wars and earthquakes wipe entire cities off the map. Seriously, anything that actually survives to the present day is a minor miracle. It's the exception, not the rule.
This is such a great way to visualize it. This idea comes from the historian Edwin Yamauchi, and it's a huge reality check. First, only a tiny fraction of anything from the past survives the centuries. Of that, only a fraction of sites are ever even found and surveyed. Of those, a much smaller fraction are actually excavated. And even then, of all the stuff that's dug up, only a tiny piece of it is ever properly examined and finally published for the world to see. It's like a funnel of disappearing information.
And here are some real numbers to put on that. Just look at Palestine, for example. We know of roughly 5,000 archaeological sites there. Guess how many have had any kind of scientific excavation? About 150. And of those, only about 26 are considered major, long-term digs. That's a tiny, tiny percentage of what's out there.
And even when we do find stuff, the bottleneck just continues. There are about 500,000 cuneiform tablets, those amazing clay texts, sitting in museum collections around the world. The best estimate? Only about 10% of them have ever been translated and published. The rest are just sitting in drawers and basements, waiting for someone with the time and the money to study them.
So, this all leads to an absolutely crucial point. You have to know the difference between absence of evidence and evidence of absence. They sound similar, but they are worlds apart. Just because we haven't found archaeological proof for something doesn't mean it didn't exist. To say that would be a huge logical leap, especially when you realize how little evidence we actually have to work with.
And here's the perfect example. Pontius Pilate. I mean, he's a major figure in the New Testament, but for almost 2,000 years, there was not a single shred of archaeological evidence that he was a real person. Not one inscription, nothing. Now, if we had used that absence of evidence to say he was fictional, well, we would have been dead wrong. Because then, in 1961, archaeologists in Caesarea found a stone inscription with his name and title carved right into it. Case closed.
Okay, so this brings us to our second big principle. Even when we do find those rare, miraculous fragments from the past, what they mean isn't always obvious. You see, facts don't just pop out of the ground fully formed. They have to be interpreted.
I love this quote from the archaeologist James Pritchard because it just nails it. Pots, walls, bones, these things don't speak for themselves. They only get their meaning when a human being comes along and, using logic and experience, pieces together a story about them. It's a process of careful deduction.
And if you want a classic example of this in action, we have to talk about the famous, or maybe infamous, case of the so-called Stables of Solomon at the ancient city of Megiddo.
So, back in the day, archaeologists found these huge buildings with pillars and troughs, and the theory was, wow, these are King Solomon's stables for his giant chariot army. It seemed to fit the biblical accounts perfectly, and for years it was held up as direct proof. But as science got better, especially our ability to date pottery found at the site, the interpretation completely changed. It turns out the buildings are from a later time period, probably from King Ahab's reign. And they probably weren't stables at all, but public storehouses or barracks.
And this is such an important lesson. It doesn't prove the biblical text is wrong, not at all, but it shows how dangerous it is to tie a historical claim to one single archaeological interpretation, because those interpretations can and often do change as we get more data.
So where does that leave us? I mean, if the evidence is so fragmented and our interpretations are always tentative, what good is archaeology for understanding history? What's its proper role?
Let's put it all together. Here are a few rules of thumb to keep in your back pocket. First, always remember the evidence is incomplete. Second, interpretations can always change. Third, and this is a big one, not finding something is not proof it didn't exist. And finally, maybe the most important point of all, archaeology's greatest strength isn't proving or disproving specific events. It's in shining a light on the entire world behind the text.
You know, the best way to think about archaeology isn't as a judge with a gavel, slamming it down and declaring something true or false. It's so much more like a flashlight in a huge, dark room. It can't show you the whole room at once, but wherever you point it, it brilliantly illuminates what's there. The culture, the economy, the technology, what people ate, how they lived. It gives you the context.
And that really leaves us with one last big question to chew on. Understanding the limits of archaeology actually makes us better, more careful readers of history. Because if figuring out the purpose of a simple stone wall is this complicated, well, how much more carefully should we approach the complex human stories that were written about that wall and the world it once stood in?